Hi everyone, thank you for joining for EIV webinar on building culture for volunteering organizations. We have Abhishek with us, who is the co-founder of Wisdom Tree, founder Blue Ribbon Movement. If you are from Mumbai, you would know the beautiful work that they do. And if you're from any other city, you may want to go check out their social media to learn more about the civic engagements that they do. I'm in Delhi, and I feel like if there was something like Blue Ribbon in Delhi, I would have been very active member of it. But I think they're a very hyper local organization that's able to do a lot more in a smaller, in one locality only, not a smaller city for sure. And eventually they set up Wisdom Tree. So Abhishek will be able to talk more about Wisdom Tree and the focus that they put a lot on the culture building aspect of it. Yeah, thanks. A few instructions if all of us could keep our mics on mute if you're not speaking. When we have questions, please feel free to unmute, ask questions. Abhishek should take 20-25 minutes to present his thing and get going, and then we'll open up for Q&As. We also have Ashok from Wisdom Tree. If you want to send him DMs or connect with the Wisdom Tree, he can directly connect. Or we'll eventually also connect you post the webinar if you find it useful and want to connect. Over to you, Abhishek. Please feel free to talk about yourself, your organization, and the idea behind Wisdom Tree. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Megha. Namaste, everybody. Good to see all of you who are currently not visible, but I'm hoping that we'll get to see some of you at least, so that I know who I'm starting with. The typical challenge I put in front of any group that I begin with is, can we reach half the on camera? This is the time when we used to have all cameras on, early Zoom days. I thought it'll be nice to see at least half the people I'm speaking to. So if some of you can just at least show your face, wave, so that I know I can put some faces to the names. Hi Purna, hi, hello, good to see you. It seems like you're logging in from a train. So hi, Purna, thanks. Some others, if we can see some others, be nice. Hi Neha. Okay, some of you logging from outside. Okay, we hit what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, that's where we hit for now. Let's 8. Hi, Mukul. Okay, so we're at 8 on 24. That is where we are. 8 on 26. So that's where we are. Yeah, it'll be lovely to see more of you as we speak and as we go ahead. I'm going to start with talking about a topic very close to my heart, a topic which I feel uh, deeply passionate about. That's culture, and yeah, and I think let's get started. Ashok, if you can flash our slides without much ado. Today's topic: how to build culture for volunteering organizations. Uh, I'm going to talk a little bit about briefly why did I reach this conclusion that culture is kind of the secret sauce. Why culture? Why bother about culture? And from there, I'm going to go into a couple of insights we had about culture, and then really what should we do? How do we create a better culture? So hopefully some very specific how-tos for culture. That's really the plan for the day. So yeah, you can go ahead, Ashok. So here are questions that we look for today. One is, how do we inspire people to keep volunteering? So once you have enrolled a person, how do you keep them engaged on a longer journey of volunteering? What makes that happen? Uh, Second is, does volunteering energy only have to go towards external impact, or can volunteers take on organizational roles? Right? Is it possible for volunteers to actually do organization building, traditionally roles which are paid for? Right? Can volunteers take on roles which are org building roles? And how do we create conditions where volunteering becomes a powerful experience, a nurturing experience of sorts? So volunteering mein kis tarah maza aa jaye? So that's what we're going to speak about. Uh, our answer to all these questions is always culture. And hopefully you have questions like, why bother with culture? What exactly do we mean by it? And how do we begin to impact with culture? Right. So I thought I'll share a little bit about why I kind of reached this conclusion to culture. Over the last 2 decades odd, I've had a chance to work with a lot of NGOs across the sector. And a bunch of these NGOs have been clients and partners, and lots to learn. So I started as a trainer, but over time, from training and OD, I've figured that this is really where the energy is. This is where the cultural energy is. Um, my first volunteering experience happened in '92, where the Earth Summit was going on. This was when 1992 my Earth Summit was happening. So I was excited. I was like, okay, let's do something. School kid, didn't know much, wrote some articles, did a few things here and there, joined Cub Club, Sanctuary Magazine, and so on. And from then, several places where I had a chance to join in, had a chance to join to Rotaract, the Humanist Movement, Initiatives of Change. 2000, we started BRM again based on the experience of volunteering that was so energizing. Went to do my MBA, did a few corporate gigs, found that my heart is really in the not-for-profit space. So revived Blue Ribbon as a social enterprise. In 2013, we started doing training for other organizations. And from there, the journey moved to doing Wisdom Tree, where we actually do culture. So that's kind of been the journey. It's been a couple of decades of looking at human behavior, couple of decades of looking at how people respond, how people change. Why do people do what they do, I think, and how do we get people to collectively create results positively? That was really my quest. Uh, in my reflections, I have figured that change takes time, right? And all of you know that behavioral change takes a lot of time. If you try changing any one of your behaviors, you will see how long it takes and how much we are used to, behaving in a certain way. And for the longest time, I thought training is the way. I thought train people, train, and run training programs and so on. Uh, but over time, I've realized that there is a limit to how much training can accomplish. There's a limit to how much OD designing, redesigning structures can accomplish, because human beings are ultimately cultural creatures. Each of us really is a cultural being, and that's the argument I want to make. We are symbolic people. We look at what's happening around us. We make meaning of the world, and constantly, you're not only responding to how you've been trained to respond. You're responding to the culture you are embedded in. Yeah, and that's really the insight that I had. And the big point of this insight was me reflecting on my past, and I want to share that one incident before we go in. So this is the question: what can convert a bus into a rath and build national energy? So in 1992, we had a very serious event in our country's history, the demolition of the Babri Masjid. And before this demolition was a yatra called the Rath Yatra. A lot of hype. There's a yatra around the country, some 7,000 kilometers. Everybody was like mobilized. Rath Yatra ho rahi hai. So I was also like, kya chal kya raha hai? So, and when I looked at the Rath, it was not a Rath, it was a bus. And it was a man on a bus, right? Waving around to crowds. But the story around the man on the bus was that this is a yatra and this is a rath, and it travels the whole country, and the whole country actually buys into this belief that there was a rath that actually traveled, and there was a yatra. So the story around it ultimately leading to the demolition. And as a child, I have seen riots happen, people destroying property firsthand. And when I reflected back, and of course, that story of using culture to move the society has been an ongoing journey for people in power and people not in power also. So I said, what is it? What is it that can convert something simple like a bus into a rath, right? Much later, Gandhiji, right? And Gandhiji's use of the charkha, what could convert a simple spinning instrument into something that is so powerful that it becomes a symbol of a struggle, a freedom struggle, right? And even in normal organizations, there is a simple board and you have something called the employee of the month. Now, if you really deconstruct what's the employee of the month, it's a board with a photograph of a person. But it means so much to the person who's there, right? That they are the employee of the month. And how you can just put one board with a photograph of a person and a line employee of the month behind it, and so much meaning gets constructed around it. Everybody is touchy about who's the employee of the month. Everybody wants to be the employee of the month. Whereas actually, in very simple terms, all you did was you took a board, you took a photo, you took a title, and there you suddenly have a whole new world in which people are behaving, right? And this is why I say that human beings are symbolic creatures. And in your organization also, while we feel that we are dealing with trainable people and rational people, we are also dealing with symbolic people, right? uh, so yeah, we can go ahead. So this is the argument we are making. We are saying culture is a resource, just like you have renewable resources and non-renewable resources, and your non-renewable resources run out. Renewable resources come from nature. We are saying cultural energy is a renewable resource, right? It's a resource that doesn't run out. It's a resource you can learn to tap, just as there is solar energy, just as there is wind energy. Culture को आप literally कैसे tap कर सकते हैं, right? That's the possibility that we are standing for. So just as you have financial capital and human capital that leads to impact, we're saying cultural capital and culture also leads to impact. The only thing is, even with human beings, we're still learning how to tap into newer forms of energy. And we feel we are at a place where we are learning how to tap cultural energy, how to create cultural energy, and how to tap it to get people to action, right? And that's what we're going to learn. How do you really tap cultural energy, right? And think of it as a resource. You can go ahead. Now, this is particularly true if you are a volunteering organization, right? A small cartoon which says that this volunteer agency is unfair. They asked me to volunteer for just one time, but they got them hooked. And I would argue that life is made up of volunteering acts only. Even turning on your camera is a voluntary act that you choose or choose not to do, right? And even though you're paid for something, a part of the effort that you put in is always discretionary, extra effort. How do you inspire people to go beyond? So while we are talking about volunteering organizations, I'm talking about organizations all across also, right? And how do you do this? So that's where we are in terms of the power of long term, particularly volunteering in volunteering organizations. I come from an organization where people have volunteered for 8 years, 10 years, ongoing. As young people throughout their 20s, they've been volunteering. So I can share a bit about how that happens, right? How does somebody start and then stay on? And we have Kejal, Ashok, people here who started volunteering when they were 18 and 19, and now they're like hitting their 30s, nearly 30s, and continuing to volunteer. Uh, so let's see why culture then is important, right? Let's go ahead. So several issues come to us when we work with organizations. People are not, there's no ownership. People don't come consistently. Volunteers don't really, volunteers, we can't retain them. Gen Z, we don't understand what Gen Z really wants. The people are feeling hopeless, demotivated time to time because this work is so tough. How do I volunteer with other areas of my life? How do I get time to volunteer when life is so busy? Lack of resources, so at a sector level we have a lack of resources thing going. And how do we maintain quality for bulk volunteering? So a bunch of questions. We are saying that the answer is not only any one thing, but culture is a part of the answer, right? So let's look at how do we use culture then, and how can we get culture going. So to start with the first story. This is the story of an organization that is in small town India, a tier 3, tier 2, tier 3 city, and working on alcohol, working on tobacco prevention, tobacco addiction prevention. Two founders and a whole bunch of volunteers. Again, similar problems. Volunteers are not consistent. Volunteers come and go. We don't know what to do. Our bandwidth is less. And because the bandwidth is less, there is lesser time to fundraise because founders are busy running day-to-day things and so on. And they really reflected on what can we do. And they came up with a very simple idea. They said, let's have a core team of volunteers. Yeah, let's announce a core team, and let's not make it open. Let's invite people into the core team. Like it's a deal to then get invited into the core team. So the news of the core team happened. People who had skills got invited into the core team. It became a deal to be invited into the core team, and people started coming in. And now, suddenly you are a part of the core team. So you are more responsible, right? Earlier also you were the same person, the organization was same, but now there's this additional thing. Oh God, I'm a core team member, and so I should do more, right? And so more people, more consistency, more projects. Instead of raising financial resources first, these people raised people resources, right? They got people to be more motivated. Now one can see and say, yaar, isme kya badi baat hai, core team bana diya, we can also make a core team. बड़ी बात इसलिए है क्योंकि the idea of a core team working will not work in every organization. You can't say, okay, so this is a great idea, I'll copy this idea, right? Cultural ideas are harder to copy. What works in your organization, you will have to crack. So that's the first big reason why core team was a big deal for that organization, right? It was the first time they thought up and it worked for them. So cultural ideas cannot be copied. You have to think of mere organization mein kya work karega. Will it be like the culture champion concept that will work? Will a certain old blue ribbon, we had a group of 10 people called Club 10, and there was a lot of hype about who will be in Club 10, and there was an announcement and a youth organization, everybody felt excited, and Club 10 became the buzz. So you will have to find the pulse of your organization, right? And these people found the pulse and said core team is the way to do this. Now, also, there is no cultural intervention that doesn't have a side effect. So people who get left out of the core team are going to feel horrible about it. And you have to deal with what's the impact of others and so on, right? So there is also no one-sided, fail-safe method. You have to choose a method that will work the most and create the least amount of side effects, undesirable side effects. And by cracking the core team idea, these people were able to do that. These people were able to raise a lot of the human bandwidth, gave them a lot of freedom to do other things. And therefore, then, the whole, and the great thing about raising volunteer energy is you don't have to pay volunteers, and the upper limit on raising volunteer energy is unlimited, right? But something like this really made volunteers stick on. So it's an example of culture. It looks small, but it's not a small deal. Choosing the right language, choosing the right symbols, choosing the right framing are all big deals. Let's go ahead. So we'll share two insights only. I mean, there are lots of insights to share, but we'll share two insights that we feel are really important. एक insight is the three brother insight, we call it. ऐसा मान लीजिए family में तीन भाई है, culture, strategy, and operations. And by strategy, we mean everything from theory of change to what impact metrics you will have, how will we go about achieving what we have. So a lot of gyan on strategies around. Your donor looks at what's your strategy. Everybody's saying strategy. So we feel strategy is like the older brother, very formal and very very confident, very erudite. And then there is operations, which is the youngest brother. वो चुपचाप काम करता है. Operations, they're just supposed to do things, right? The operations of an organization. And we feel culture is like the middle child. It's the hippie, it's the cool child listening to music away from everybody. It's ignored. Like culture to aise hi build ho jayega. It'll just be able to build culture. And we are saying, no, this is not how it works. You need to get these three tied in. Your culture has to support strategy and enable operations. Yeah, so, and let's make this real through an example of culture circles that evolved. So I started doing workshops in one particular organization with the top team of that organization. So earlier the workshops were all about learning new skills and all, but workshops mein dheere dheere the space started opening up of people talking about how do we do things, and really working through each other's issues, working, detoxing with each other and so on. And slowly these workshops became what got called culture circles. Culture circle is not a workshop, but a time when the organization comes to talk about how they do things, right? And this is a very important intervention because you're not bringing together people in a meeting. You're not bringing people together with a learning agenda. You are bringing people together to say, let's reflect on how we are doing things. Let's reflect on how are things going for us. हम कैसे कर रहे हैं, क्या कर रहे हैं नहीं, क्यों कर रहे हैं नहीं, how, right? And so we started culture circles. Culture circles became super hit. Culture circles became the thing. Everybody was waiting for culture circles. That we have a lot of fights, but we are like culture circle में सुलझाएंगे. Before we knew it, culture circle became the spa. Organizational spa. Yani 3 mahine the organization gets fully like worked up, and then they have 3 days culture circle where all the detox happens, which was good, but not enough. And slowly we realized that this culture circle should not happen randomly. It should happen before the strategic planning meeting of the organization. Because when people talk about, how they're doing and one-to-one, heart-to-heart connection, ek to you can't maintain it throughout. You need special spaces where you're able to work with each other and so on. And bringing that energy into the planning process, right? So you're inspired, you're dreaming, and people say, after a workshop, the energy fizzles. But here, what we realized was you locate the planning right after a culture circle, so that there's a lot of energy, and that energy goes into planning and your dreams, and so now the organization does it this way. It does a culture circle, and it follows it up with a planning meeting. So you clear out interpersonal issues, you work through your culture, and then with that new energy, you do the strategic planning, right? And now we've been able to, with that organization, also integrate operations into it, which means that whatever is taught in culture and planned will be implemented on a weekly and monthly beat, looking at culture. So it's not culture, we don't think is a one time thing. It's like जैसे नहाते हैं और ब्रश करते हैं और ये नहीं पूछते बार बार. We don't ask ourselves what's the use of bathing. That doesn't directly help my task. So culture is the collective body cleanup. Just as there's a physical cleanup, we feel culture is a psychic cleanup of the organization. Yeah. So whenever you're doing culture, it does not mean, oh, let's make people play games, let's take people to a picnic, let's eat lunch together. Those are culture building activities, but for them to be effective, they have to tie to your strategy, right? And if they don't tie to the strategy, it's just time pass, right? It's good to do, but also if culture doesn't convert to operations, it creates this warm fuzzy feeling, but what was the end result, right? So this tying together piece is really critical for culture. Let's look at an example of what that looks like. We had a large organization that was doing several thousand volunteers, almost about 20,000 volunteers in a year, and they still wanted to scale up further while keeping the spirit intact. Yeah, Mukul, we'll talk about defining culture. Broadly right now we're talking about culture as how we do things. Yeah, and I'll come into what are the parts of culture. So this organization wanted to, scale up, and but the aim was to keep spirit intact, right? And to keep the spirit intact, they're like, how do we do this? What's our spirit? So we said, even before you keep your spirit intact, you need to answer, what is our spirit? What is the org spirit? Yeah, and let's decode that. So we went to volunteers to ask them, why are you here? And we thought the answers would be that, oh, we care for the cause, or the answers were, we care for the people in this organization. We care for how we are treated. We care for how they connect to us, right? And we found that the core of the essence of the culture was the interaction between the employee and the volunteer, right? That was the heart of, and how that interaction happens, and the spirit of Shraddha and Seva and so on. And we used this data to create a volunteer journey for them, a very structured volunteer journey for them, which led to effective engagement, volunteer retention, and so on. So that's an example, but we are 20 minutes on, and this is a good time to pause, just to do a vibe check. We could pause here and get into a Q&A, or I could go into a second insight. Megha, do you have any idea on how do you want to do a vibe check? Should we do a emoji that people, if you'd like to continue in this format, we could do a thumbs up, and if you'd like to open up for an interactive Q&A, we could do any other emoji except thumbs up. So
I think if people are excited, they can use any reactions, or if they have questions, Abhishek, if you want to look at the culture question. I quickly wanted to acknowledge how the analogy we really liked, and being a middle child, how much I liked that in analogy, because what's better than being culture and being the cool one and being talked about.
yes. True,
Yes.
true.
But we can continue if you want to quickly and answer the define culture thing, and then we can continue the deck if people are still excited.
Yeah, Mukul, so what happens is when we go to organizations, especially not-for-profits, it gets very touchy saying, how do you define culture? So you could use various models. Culture is stories, artifacts, mental models, worldviews, beliefs, assumptions. But what we figured, the easiest way to talk about culture for us is we say it's how. how you do things, right? And that's a non-controversial. We found that's a non-controversial definition that doesn't get people fighting over technicality. We say let's take the broadest definition. How we do things is our culture, right? And that's what we're working on. So we go with a very simple definition. Culture is how. That's and that kind of prevents a lot of intellectual discussion on that. Maybe what I can do is I can take about 5 minutes, wrap up, and then can we open it up for conversation and comments?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ukul, we take it and let's have that conversation, but we definitely take it much more around process. We say that it's really the process of things. Let's go to a quick second insight. One of the mistakes I made for the longest time was thinking that I'm socially driven, and social impact is my cause. I want to be there for social impact. And second mistake, everybody just wants social impact. And I'll decode both the mistakes. The first mistake was it is not true that I always wanted social impact. Uh, it was that first I wanted fun, right? When as a school student, when I started kind of experimenting with things, it was more excitement. It was fun. My first volunteering experience was not, oh, I care for the planet and what will happen. My first experiment was, mera article aayega. Excitement. I'll go on a trek. So nature was a side effect. It was fun. There was a whole second phase where fun alone was not enough, and I had to learn, right? And when we started Blue Ribbon, we started it saying that we learned the most when we were volunteering. We didn't learn in classes, we didn't learn in projects as much as we learned while volunteering. So the motivation moved to learning. And then at some stage for me, I realized learning is great, fun is great, but dusro ka kya? What about the society? What about the world? And social motivation eventually emerged. So to be honest, it was not that I was always like socially inclined. It was something exciting I did. I started learning from it and then slowly care evolved. So the way we see volunteer motivations, we see them as, and the reason we are doing this pyramid is not because social impact is a better motivator. It's just that we have lesser people who have social impact as a motivation, right? And then appealing to people saying, oh, this is like social impact is, it's the thing. It does not work because there is a bunch of people who want to just have fun and they want to, by the way, volunteer. And there's a bunch of people who want to improve their careers, who want to learn, and by the way, they want to volunteer. And then there's a smaller bunch of people who are troubled by the state of the world, and they're like, it doesn't matter if it's not fun. I will suffer, but I will do something for the world. It's okay if I don't learn anything, but I will. And I think I would say the mistake that we make, and a mistake that a lot of the volunteer crowd makes, is assuming others are like them. At least for the longest time, I made that mistake, right? And realizing that others are not like us, and there are different motivations. And this the seminar is called Every Indian Volunteer. If you want every Indian to volunteer, then we have to cater to different types of Indians, right? And they're not all the same. So we'll share a case study of how this kind of different volunteer motivation looks like. And this is again from an organization that's done some great work, and it's been able to retain volunteers over very long term. And young people, mostly people think young people are flippant, wo aake jate hain, right? And this organization's intent was volunteering. We felt that deep volunteering, puri zindagi bhar ka kaam hai. Social change is not a few years. Social change is not one project. Social change is a lifelong journey. So how did we do this? So one is we framed this as a personal growth evolutionary journey, that this work is not only about the world, this is about your own evolution and self-discovery. And the decision making process of this collective became sarva anumati, decision making with the consent of all, right? So all the core volunteers would take decisions together. So suddenly now, one, I am doing my own spiritual work, I'm doing my own growth and so on. And two, every decision is taken with my permission, right? And that's solid ownership, because that ownership is where people are actually able to stick to each other, because all decisions are together and they operate from a spiritual context. So suddenly this is not about how much we are able to accomplish, but how much is my depth of growth, right? And how much am I contributing? So when we said, how do we get volunteers to do organizational tasks? How do we get volunteers to do organizational tasks? we are able to see that when they have real ownership, not just ownership as a value, but actually their decisions are taken into account, then we see that volunteers get empowered and they stay on for long term. Okay, we can go ahead. Okay, so last part of this, what do we do? How do we hack culture? Right, and here are some practical tips that we want to give you that you can apply immediately. So wisdom tree, we do not believe that culture is an expert topic that somebody from outside can come and teach you. We believe you are the expert of your culture. What will work in your culture, your people understand the best, right? And what wisdom tree does is catalyzes this process. It helps organizations figure out their own innate wisdom. uh, so this is what we would do. I think the first thing to do with your top team is assessing whether our culture is supporting the strategy and enabling operations, right? So let's say your strategy is that you would like to scale into newer geographies, right? And but while scaling, you want to maintain your spirit, right? Now, this culture should enable the organization to feel like one big organization and not have each geography necessarily develop exclusive cultures, right? Otherwise, you create silos. So culture will have to be thought through in a way that even if the organization doesn't meet physically, how can there be a common cultural fabric, right? That's how culture would support the strategy. If the organization's aim is to scale up and scale up in numbers, right, then what is the common culture that everybody will have? And we will talk about, I think, Mukul, what you shared are very interesting conversations, what keeps RSS going, right? And LWEs, whatever. I mean, I don't know what LWEs you mean by, but yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll have that conversation. So bringing your top people into the room and saying, is organization ka culture abhi kaisa hai? How are things? Is it helping us accomplish our strategy? Is it helping us do our operations? And a lot of times, culture becomes a problem, doesn't enable, right? So first, honest conversation. Second is deconstructing culture. And again, you can do that, right? And here are four things that you can pick to divide your culture. One, what are the stories we are telling to each other? You know, the story about the founding of the organization, the story about what is the highest point of the organization. The stories are the currency of culture. So if you listen for stories in your organization, that's one area. Artifacts, you know, what are the physical objects, your logos, your banners, your notice boards, your physical space? What are the artifacts? Lapel pins, you know, Rotary and Rotract have a lapel pin. It's an artifact, right? Everybody wears it and identifies themselves. So what are the physical things that represent culture? What images are used and so on? We also invite you to listen for metaphors. Is your organization a family? Is your organization a team? Is it a well-oiled machine? Is it a forest in which you are all explorers walking together? Metaphor क्या use हो रहा है आपके organization के लिए? And rituals, right? So what does your organization do habitually? Does everybody come together to have lunch? Does your organization go on a picnic every monsoon for a trek? What are rituals that you do again and again? Yeah. Then we have this format called culture circle, which is simply bring people, get them into a circle and ask them, how are we doing? You know, hum jo kar rahe hain, how's our culture looking like? And instead of using the word culture, you say, what are things that are okay to do? What are things that are not okay to do? What are things we need to talk about, right? And so we encourage organizations to have culture circles, ideally spend a few hours every week just talking about culture, because the return on that time is very, very high. If you spend a couple of hours every week just saying, how was the last week? How did we do what we did? What were the things we need to talk about? We see it as transformation. Uh, for volunteers, particularly, not to assume that all volunteers are motivated by one thing. So your program design threshold, the program has to be fun. It has to have a learning component and it has to create an impact. That's when you will have a sticky volunteer, right? And the touch point of the volunteer and the employee will have to be really, really positive and powerful. Uh, then we have resolving organizational dilemmas. An example of a dilemma is, okay, should this work be done by a paid employee or a volunteer? Or an example of a dilemma would be, how can a volunteer be inspired by a paid employee? Because the paid employee feels, okay, you know, I'm doing this for a salary. Do I have locus standi? मैं कैसे बोलूँ volunteer को कुछ करो? Because, you know, they'll say, oh, you are getting salary, so you're going to make us do this. So these are organizational dilemmas, right? And solving them is important, and maybe we can take some in Q&A. Values, we think values are a big part of what happens. So what do these values mean? Are we living our values? And these kind of reflections. And lastly, we have Wisdom Tree has a tool called culture audit, right? And it's a tool that we offer to organizations just to get a pulse of your current culture. And this is a gift from Wisdom Tree to most organizations, gives you a dipstick of how's your culture currently. And we have made this also as a very positive tool. So it will always tell you your culture is either good or very good. In very rare cases will it say your culture is in trouble, because we've seen that the positive attitude towards culture, even taking the survey makes people excited about their culture. The survey itself is a tool to strengthen the culture. Yeah, so these are a bunch of hacks that we have. uh, and yeah, the last point, we found what is the big secret on culture is each of us is like radiating energy from ourselves. We are actually the source of the culture in our organizations. So the big secret on culture is you live the culture, you embody the culture, you embed the culture, and people copy, right? It's more not what you say, but what people see you do, right? So people copy people. And we would say that if you want to, if you say what is the biggest secret of culture building, we would say, live the culture, live the values. Even though it sounds like a cliche, we've seen that the best leaders who are able to hold culture are people who are, but if a camera goes on them, secret camera goes on them, you will see a person living that culture, right? And that close thing. So we would say, yeah, the secret ingredient is how do you live the culture. And each of you, we feel, are key people in your organization. You living that culture is the first, foremost, and key requirement for that culture to happen in the org. A thumb rule I use is multiply yourself by the number of people in your organization. What kind of an organization will that create? And that's the answer. Yeah, in terms of commitment, in terms of and so on. Cool. Let's move ahead. Last question, should we all take a culture journey together? So Wisdom Tree, we dream of a sector where working is a lot of fun, where working is a lot of joy, where working is a lot of abundance. We feel that those who do good should do it happily, should do it joyfully, should do it in a very, in a way that is fun. I mean, we're doing something really difficult. We're doing something really challenging. Let's do it in a way that nourishes us. Let's do it in a way that's fun. Let's do it in a way that is engaging, that's spiritual. So the invitation we had for this group was, can we all take a culture journey together, right? Is it possible for all of us together to work on our culture and learn from each other and build a real culture of volunteering at a sector level? Uh, how do we do it? We have a program that we run called DLDC, Developing Leaders, Designing Cultures. So leadership and culture. Uh, we start with a lab where, so again, our aim in culture is that everybody should be a culture expert. We don't want only Wisdom Tree to be the culture experts. We want every org to have culture experts. So we start with a lab. The lab asks you these uncomfortable questions saying, are you living the culture that you are saying you want to create? It teaches you tools. Look at where is your organization getting stuck. um, then we support you with new conceptual workshops. We take on a live project, and there's a closing lab for 3 days. So it's a entirely, the journey is a 9-month journey, and we've run a cohort. We've figured that in 9 months you can re-energize the organization if the leadership team is committed to doing it, right? That's the big if. If the leaders are not on board, no culture intervention works. If leaders are on board, we can take 9 months and we can be a different org. So that's DLDC. It's a lot of fun, lot of personal growth. What we call cultural literacy, right? Really being able to talk about culture, language around culture, designing your own culture interventions, being a culture champion. We have some tools. We have tools which kind of deconstruct culture, auditing the culture. We have some personal inventories that we've built. And at a system level, assessing, decoding your culture, responding to challenges, designing a thriving organization. So idea is again that you don't build only the self or the system. You build the system and the self that impacts the system, right? And that's what DLDC is trying to do. Our hope is, Ashok, we can close. Yeah, our hope is that if we are all able to work on culture together, this dream of every Indian volunteer. If we feel that by working on culture, volunteering becomes cooler and cooler. Every person feels like volunteering, and when they volunteer, they have a great experience. They stay on, they continue to volunteer. And this is how slowly we feel a field of volunteering will keep expanding. We don't see it expanding only organically. We see it us being intentional about our culture being a big ingredient in how more and more people will volunteer. So that's our dream, and we'd love to partner with you. We'd love for all of us to do this together. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Abhishek. Thanks a lot. Before I dive into the questions I have or the question that people have submitted in the chat, I would like if people can put in chat one thing that they feel worked as a cultural thing in their organization. I know people who go for team lunches, people who go to play sports. For somebody like me, I can't understand how people change of outfits and play a sport, then go back to their work and do things. So if people can put that, what has worked for culture in their organizations, and I'll give you some time to sip water, Abhishek, for the time you've been speaking, and dive into some questions that I have. So one thing I feel, Abhishek, that when we keep talking about culture, there are these memes on Instagram. You'll see that the HR will drag you to Fun Fridays while your workload's still pending, and they are dragging you to do yoga, stressful things. But they're even today I was seeing a video where the salesperson is actually screaming to get de-stressed. How do you draw that sweet spot of culture not being a drag and people actually enjoying it?
Well, as long as the HR does culture, it will be a drag, I feel. Sorry for all the apologies to all the HR people, but I don't feel HR should own culture. I feel people should own culture, right? And the day the culture becomes collectively owned, it stops being a drag. Till culture is an HR responsibility, it will stay a drag, right? So of course the leadership sets the tone, but it has to set a tone in a way that everybody co-owns the culture, right? And yeah, HRs make bad decisions if they don't know what people want. People know best what they want, and if you give people the freedom to decide that, they'll decide exactly what they want. So yeah, culture should belong to people, not to HR.
Okay.
And that's the art of culture design, right? How do you get people to own their culture?
Yes. And there is this question I had received in, I will ask you to look at the comments in the chats also. There's this question I came across that for corporate volunteers or people who do short-term volunteering, right? You get a person only for like 2 hours or 3 hours, or you're only able to communicate them very less. How do you effectively deliver a volunteering opportunity and build a culture within that they continue to stay back, come back, or they feel the culture of volunteering? Yeah, that's too much pressure in few hours. So for somebody,
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say it's part science and part art. The science is attention to detail. The science is what happens right from the point of time the volunteer walks in. What are the different points where the volunteer experiences the culture, right? And if we design with detail, attention to detail, like small things, like there'll be a bunch of flowers at the center of a centerpiece, or each volunteer coming in will be given a pin. Attention to detail, right? And every touch point reinforcing the culture. The art part of it is that we need to have a lot of love in our hearts. We need to connect to the person, not to use them as an instrument to do something, but really connect to the human being on the other side. Who is this person, right? And getting really interested in the person, not artificially but caring, looking at saying that, in our family a new person has walked in, let's welcome them, and let's do it with love. So the art piece and the science piece together, even a 3-hour window is enough for a person to feel like a spark and say, okay, this is it for me.
yeah, but I still feel like all these things, right, Abhishek, saying that being a family, finding that sweet spot, I think that's what we get in a lot of textbooks, Wikipedia articles, or Instagram listicle posts where they use it to get their engagement. But can you maybe quote more examples on how that has worked for some organizations, or like I know you talk about chai a lot in your culture conversations, is a thing that you do, right? For me, maybe culture is that finding people are being able to do in uh, small activities on the spot, or finding you said that pins or labels are a culture thing because people connect with that. But what are some things that work for people when they're coming in for one-time activity with your experience with BRM as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, our experience or my experience has been, it's a little bit like falling in love, right? It can be, you can create conditions to fall in love, but the actual act of falling in love is an act of grace, right? And to me, the conditions of falling in love are really, how is the volunteer being treated? Are you present fully on the spot? To the needs of the moment, right? And like you said, a little bit of spontaneity, a little bit of creativity, the energy of the space, right? How do you build, because people are responding not to the content of the program alone. It's not about the activity. You realize it's about the energy and the relationships that get formed. And to hold that energy, you need to firstly embody that whole energy. And yeah, it could be that at that moment, one of the volunteers says, let's step away after this session for a chai. And is your employee or is your volunteer manager agile enough to say, okay, let's do that, because who knows, that's the conversation, right? I remember talking to one large movement and we were hanging out and socializing, and they jokingly said ke sangathan वैसे भी कार्यों से कहाँ बनता है. Where does the organization happen? Through actions. It happens through informal hangouts, right? So the movement is not only built, or actions are not only built in the formal time. It's built in the hangouts, it's built in the relationships, right? And how do you get people that think,
Yes.
yeah, I think the last day I'd say, yeah, just that this whole experience, right? If people have an amazing experience, people want good experiences, memorable experiences that they can talk about, tweet about, Insta about. And memorable experiences have to be a little out of the ordinary. It doesn't have to be just another, oh God, yet again kind of a thing. How do you create those experiences, right? Especially with young people, they want these fun experiences.
Yeah. Another thing, I see a lot of people talking about Gen Z, okay, how they're not, we can't understand them. What do they do? I'm a Gen Z and I take a lot of offense on that. Like, my God, I think I'm interested in such meaningful volunteering. I do a lot of interesting work and I'm passionate about it. And then there are people talking Gen Z like this, Gen Z like that. Do you also think that the culture that people are building are also culture that they want? So, um, thanks, Manali. I'm sure a lot of young people, we are fed up of people saying Gen Zs are like. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that there's this thing, okay, the leadership is not Gen Z. So the culture that they want to build and the culture that you want to build with the leadership is not what we want to do, right? How do you, or have you been able to do that, that you get more people involved in designing that? Maybe leadership is not the right person to design culture. Maybe culture isn't bitching about leadership,
Yeah.
gossiping about them in a healthy manner, not in a bad politics manner. But what do you think on that?
Well,
Uh,
so I'll give my personal take. I'm a Gen Z optimist. I have a Gen Z daughter, and I think more than any
sure,
other
of course.
generation, more than any other generation, I think this generation is going to face a bulk of the challenges. Social challenges have accelerated. So sometimes my daughter says, "Thanks for ruining the planet and passing it on to us," kind of a in a classic Gen Z style. I think the people who understand Gen Z best are Gen Z themselves, right? And therefore the way to design cultures for Gen Z is letting them design them, right? And so if there is a meme to be made on the CEO, allow it to happen, because that's, don't control the culture, don't design and engineer cultures. I feel, and as Gen Z is coming of age, I feel millennials and boomers need to just let go to say that the cultural zeitgeist has shifted. This whole everything everywhere all at once, this experience is a very Gen Z experience, because they're born into a digital world. So to me, opening up the culture and inviting authentic participation, right? And I feel Gen Z is very sensitive to any form of dishonesty and inauthenticity. And there's deep sensitivity to, is someone being fake or is someone genuinely inviting, right? A lot of cynicism. So if you genuinely open up your cultures to be led by Gen Z, to be co-designed, right? And allow a little bit of mischief and fun, allow some randomness, right? You don't need to control everything, you don't need to engineer everything. If you're willing and if you have the courage to do that, I feel Gen Z makes the culture their own. It creates a vibrant culture. In Blue Ribbon, for example, we don't sit. I'm like far away because I don't understand this generation. All the best people is the generation itself, right? And yeah, I'm hopeful. I really believe in this generation.
Yeah. There's a question of what is the kind of work that can contribute to building a culture of volunteering if costs is core at all. Yeah, if I may also add on to this, Mukul, uh, this is a common thing, right? When you're talking about culture, it often digresses from the cause that you're promoting or the social cause. Maybe sometimes you will find cultures and connections in doing something that's totally not related to your cause. If you get what I'm saying and if you can articulate it better, yeah.
Yeah, I feel, and I don't know, Mukul, I mean, if you can clarify this question also, what kind of work can contribute to building a culture of volunteering within the organization, right? Is that what is what I'm gathering? Yeah. So what we have understood is that within the heart of most people is a desire to go beyond, right? There's a desire to do something unique, there's a desire to express, there's a desire to contribute, and that desire gets hammered away, it gets locked away, it gets pushed away, which is why then people resign to cynicism and so on. And if we say only this activity qualifies as volunteering, this is not volunteering, then that's kind of a form of violence to the various types of volunteering, right? In fact, I would say more than work that can contribute to building a culture of volunteering, there's a lot of invisible volunteering that goes on all the time in every organization. It just, we don't make it visible. We don't make it visible through stories. We don't make it visible through recognitions and so on. And these could be small things. It could be a ride back home for a coworker. It could be doing something extra, some last minute running around for something that was not there. So how do we make discretionary actions visible? And as many of those as possible. So my hypothesis is volunteering in any system, there's already a lot of volunteer action happening, a lot of which is invisible to the system. And in fact, to me, the first work of volunteering would be making visible all the voluntary actions that are keeping the system going and energizing. So I would invite that, and because that gives permission to others. When I hear a story about a person, then I'm like, wow, that's interesting. I can also do it, right? And that's what generates the field of inspiration. So for me, a lot of it is making things visible, making actions visible.
Right, thanks. So put a feedback form in the session if you have a feedback for us. If you would like to join the EIV WhatsApp group, the Every Indian Volunteering Community is a community of people who are managing volunteers at large scale and are coming together on how to deal with Gen Z and how to get them to retain, get them to continue volunteering and other challenges that we keep talking about and we sharing about. There's also a question if you want to connect with the Wisdom Tree team, we can then connect you with them. Abhishek, another thing that I feel, and maybe it's gonna build on to Mukul's question is, so if I'm an environment-based organization, and my goal is that everybody who volunteers with me should become more sustainable, should be more conscious, right? Do you think that most of my culture activities should revolve around that? Do you think that's something I can inculcate through my activities, through my behavior? Or do you think that culture should be what people want to happen? Like, what if my volunteers want to smoke, my volunteers want to go out partying and not, and maybe not be very cautious of of sustainable choices because they feel sometimes let's take a break, or my team, if not just volunteers, my employees, my staff team, right? How do you think you draw that line and also push that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to also come to Mukul's original question, is very interesting. The RSS
Sorry, I
and
keep
left-wing
building on that,
extremism.
Mukul.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, the earlier RSS question also is a very, very powerful question. But
Yes.
I mean, so for me, the way I think about it is culture is the opposite of force. Culture is the opposite of rules. Culture is the opposite of pressure. It is what organically and naturally happens, right? And there's always a dance between how much you want to intervene and how much you want to allow happen. To me, that getting that balance right is the key, right? The more, at least for me, the more you use culture and the less you use force, the better it is, right? So I could, for example, force people no plastic bottles and create rules around it, and people will rebel because nobody likes to be forced. Nobody likes too many rules, right? But then if I'm providing glass bottles and I'm making them available freely in my office, then I may not even have to say it, because given a choice between plastic and glass bottle in the office, person will choose glass bottle. It's just you not, didn't make it easy for them to do that choice, right? People want to make good choices, but it's your responsibility to make the good choice the easier choice. right? Now, if you're competing a party with a documentary screening and people want to go to the party, right? And that's where things are, right? But maybe you can come up with a trek and you can do a national park trek, which is kind of fun, which touches ecology. So to me, the constraint is our creativity. It's our imagination. It's really that. That's where I would kind of come in on that. And I'd love to hear others' conversations also, because I mean, others' comments on the chat on some of these questions, because I know I'm surrounded by experts in this room itself also. So it would be lovely to have answers coming in from others also on their reflections.
Yeah. Do you want to go back to Mukul's RSS question maybe?
Yeah,
In the
I mean,
meantime.
so Mukul, it's a huge question, obviously, and there are lots of books and books of material written. We are all unpacking what the hell is going on, kind of a thing, at least for us, because we're talking about an organization that is a century old. It is the largest volunteering organization in the world, and it's a very. So there are a few things we have figured, very limited ones. One is it's a very Indian organization, is what we feel. It taps into the Indian psyche. It knows something about the Indian psyche that a lot of modern Western oriented volunteering doesn't know, right? About how much of a relational culture we are, how much of a collectivist culture we are, how much of a contextual culture we are, right? And so to me, one is we are realizing that our volunteering work and culture work has to be very Indian Western combo. It can't be a Western model. It has to be the blend of the best of both. So I think one is that. The other is it's not rocket science, but I would still say that this whole one-on-one deep long-term relationships are very sustaining. I mean, if one would meet somebody from these organizations, one of the first things they would ask is, "Aap kahan se ho?" And then they would, if you would say, "Okay, main Ratlam se hu ya Mandsaur se hu," they're quickly able to geographically place people. They're quickly able to build relational connections with people, and we feel ultimately people are driven a lot by connections and relationships. People, in fact, in our events also, people come because some other people are present, not because they care for the cause or not because of any other reason. So I think cracking this, reaching the heart of the people, we mistake that ideology is the central driver, but what we have figured is they meet a lot of other needs of the people. So today, mental health is a challenge, anxiety is a challenge, loneliness is a challenge. If volunteering meets those needs of people and of this generation, then it doesn't matter what the ideology is. It doesn't matter to people much where it is, right? People need their basic needs met. So I feel, we feel that the RSS Shakha at one stage was a personality development class plus a gymnasium plus a social hangout club, and a format that got cracked over a lot of time. But I'm sure you have some views on that, and I'd love to hear. Like you said, a combination of cause and process. So there is definitely cause, but to us, process trumped the cause, because what came first was the relational connection. What came first was my immediate needs being met. And from there, I got connected to the cause, or at least that's what we've found. A lot of people connecting first to the person or the need and then getting into the cause.
Thanks, Abhishek. I think we're on time about closing, but I think the last bit that I want from you to before we close is how does one start working on culture immediately now? Like, what's something that they can start building on? Uh, One thing I thought I would also want to share about the culture in my organization that has worked really well. So we're an organization that cannot connect with their boss over WhatsApp. We have to send an email for every single thing. I've reached home from a office meeting. I need to send him an email. There's somebody who wants to connect. We need to send an email. There's no WhatsApp, and he uses WhatsApp as he uses email as WhatsApp. He responds very fast. So as an organization, our culture is that we respond to emails very quickly as it's WhatsApp, and we also now check our emails every 30 minutes. Even if you meet me in a party or on a networking event, you will see me refreshing my Gmail as I would refresh my WhatsApp. So that's a thing that came as a force. Like, there's no other option left because you don't want to miss out. And those of you who know my boss would also know what I'm talking about. And yeah, if you don't, I would love to connect. Yes. So how do you think is something as an organization you can build on? What's first step you can do? And sorry, I'm talking one more minute. I think the best thing that my boss did as an email was that uh, a lot of things, like a very heartful things, like emails are also supposed to be very uh, follow-ups. Have you done this or that? A lot of heartfelt emails, a lot of thoughtful things have come to us in emails. And as I star mark my WhatsApp messages, I've star marked a lot of emails I've received on what do we believe in, and how supportive we are of each other, right? How do you think people can start with that? What's one thing they can do for sure that would work for everybody? I'm hoping you'll give everybody a secret sauce that you think is not there, that you started with, but you also started that culture is not a force. Is culture is a force or not a force? I think we have been going here and there. Now I think
Yeah.
it's the last word from you.
Yeah, I think it's important to see that paying attention to culture is itself a very, very significant thing. And 95% orgs that we encounter haven't even had a single conversation about culture. They've just had culture by default. So any action in culture is a positive, it's a good action. Now, what I would invite each of you is to be creative and innovate for your organization, right? You would want to look at your organization and say, okay, my organization, I think a fun day Friday might work, where Friday evening we'll invite 5 people to do a 1 minute game each, and they'll take us through some games, right? For some other organization, like I said, the monsoon trek might work. We don't know what will work for your organization, but we know that this is a process of experimentation, and it has to be led ideally by people. Maybe the first few ones have to be led by the leader or the HR, but eventually the ownership of this has to go to people. So I would invite a couple of things, right? I would invite you to make some experiments happen, right? So and I mean, I'm just giving an example of saying that, if say your team wants to do WhatsApp, and say you're stuck on emails and you're like, okay, how do we make this work? So you say, okay, we'll introduce WhatsApp Wednesdays, where we say that, okay, one day a week we'll be on WhatsApp, so rest of the time we are on email, but we're, so you push those boundaries, right? And you experiment with those. And I mean, this is just an example of a suggestion. I'm not saying you should do it because email seems to be working fine. I think what I'm saying is that the responsibility of moving the organization towards the way you would like it to work is yours, is for each one, right? And whether that means we should gather over a fireside huddle or a chai, and do our coffee pe charcha instead of chai pe charcha, or a fun day Friday or whatever, each one will have to do that for themselves, right? The simplest act, and I'll give one more. So one is pay attention to culture, two is experiment, three is just the simple act of bringing everybody in a circle and sharing stories. You know, tell me of a time when you had most fun in this organization. Just share stories, and you will see how it shifts the energy, right? So it's a very small. There's no rocket science behind culture, right? The judgment of what will work is the science, right? And that's really what it is. I would encourage each one to take one culture experiment with them. If you'd have more time, you design a culture experiment and see how you can take it to your org. But do a small experiment and see whether it works or not. It'll be fun. One last thing, Megha, before we close was, yeah, I just wanted to repeat the intention for DLDC. We were hoping that a bunch of volunteering organizations comes together, takes a journey together, learns about culture, learns from each other, and yeah, it really ups the game. It really ups the game on the culture driven volunteering experience. So that's kind of the intent, that's the invitation, that's the intention, and we'll get lots of time to talk about culture there.
Right. Thanks, Abhishek. I know that had it, I know that selling culture is a very big challenge. I'm sure, like, had it been like, how do you train your second leadership into doing something, maybe an Excel workshop, and people would have maybe registered. And I know that selling culture is extremely difficult. And while a lot of us want to learn from for-profit sector of how do they succeed, I think what's the secret sauce is to actually build your culture. A lot of us moved into social sector because of the culture, because we don't have to work from 9 to 5, because our boss doesn't only call us for work, also calls us to check on in, and you feel happy being a part of this network, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I
Yeah,
would
we've
love if
been
more
positively
organizations join.
Yeah, we've been positively surprised by how open the sector has been to the idea of culture. Maybe it's the right timing. And we made tall claims about culture, but we've substantiated those with our stories and success experiences. So, yeah, so
Yeah. And
Great. I want to thank you guys. Thank you. It was fun to be here. It was fun to kind of be supported through this journey of bringing these ideas here. It was fun to share. And yeah, it's all within the family. It's always good to meet a different part of the family.
thanks a lot. I think we have actually kind of overused the term family now, and people kind of hate it. We're not the family, but I hope we are a community for sure.
Sure.
Thanks a lot
Can
for
live in
joining. Please do
community.
fill out the feedback form. Ashok, if you could please put your website in the chat for people to check out, or if there's any other information that you think you can put in chat, that will be very useful. Please take out 2 minutes to fill out this feedback form. It helps us design better sessions for you, understand what you like and what you don't like. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot,
And
guys. I'm around. So yeah, feel free to chime in. Yeah. And our email ID is always available. We're always there for you.
I'm sure there are also people available on WhatsApp, and they're not the ones only available on email. I don't know how quickly they respond on email. Kartiki, can we please stop